Hey class, welcome back to our lecture series on physical development. We're going to focus on on development. Now we're going to look at the physical aspects of development. How the body changes across the lifespan. So some principles to kind of keep in mind as we're talking about growth, physical growth. Each part of the body has its own rate of growth. Children will typically develop in what's considered, I believe it's head down, like the head is going to develop first and then work its way down and also center out. So things that are more in the center will develop faster than things that are on the outside, like all the stuff we need, like our internal organs. Our body is going to develop faster, maybe than our arms and legs. The head's going to develop with the brain, faster than parts that are lower. So it kind of makes sense. Everything kind of has its own trajectory. Functioning becomes more increasingly differentiated in terms of like being able to use the body. It becomes much more, kids can become more precise in how they use, like, at first kids are popping things into their mouth, and that's really all their hands and mouth are good for is kind of figuring out, does this fit in my mouth? Can I eat it or not? And eventually it's like, okay, I can grab things to play with them. I can grab them to look at them, eat, so it's becoming more complex, more differentiated. It's characterized by both qualitative and quantitative changes. So we're seeing, there might be changes in terms of like there's physical changes in terms of the numbers. Like children will gain weight, they'll gain height, they're growing, physically growing and changing. But that change is not only happening in ways that we can measure, but things that we can kind of tell. We can see the difference in how children, how they play, how they interact, how they move. There's very observable changes as well that can be measured, and we can also describe those changes without quantitative numbers. And physical health development is affected by how people, their lives and their resources. So, growing, we're all subject to go through periods of growth and development, but those are strongly influenced by environment, our lives and our resources. So again, it's that nature and nurture, not one or the other. So some things to think about: physical health and development affected by, people in their lives and their resources. So something to think about, do schools support students' physical health and development? Why or why not? There's a lot of debate going on right now in the state of Oklahoma, at least at the time I'm recording this, about, how do we pay for school lunches, for example, making sure that every student has has food to eat. And that's one of those ways that we can think about our schools providing those necessary resources to help and support physical development. But you could probably you could, again, this is something for you to think about and consider. I'm just kind of spitballing here. So in terms of the periods of development we talked about in the last lecture, early childhood, around 2 to 6 years old, we're looking at major changes in terms of gross and fine motor skills, meaning, children are learning how to use like their motor, they're learning how to not only grab things, but they're learning how to use their fingers and hands in a more precise way. Their movement in terms of maybe, not that long ago, they were crawling. Now they're taking those first awkward steps. Now they're maybe walking and running and jumping and playing and doing all kinds of things that are much more complex and show that the body is more prepared physically. Middle childhood, we're talking about more refinement to those fine motor skills. So now not only are they able to be, more selective with things that they use their hands to do, but maybe now they're learning to write and use their hands in more precise ways, more fine motor skills. Also increased sensitivity to personal appearance. They're more aware of like, okay, I look this way and other people might notice this, or, they're becoming more self-conscious. They're more aware of their own appearance. Early adolescence, 10 to 14, roughly, we're looking at a lot of changes taking place because of puberty. This is menarche for females and spermarchy for men. This is, again, the body preparing for sexual maturation, meaning the body is now capable of producing children. Again, physical preparedness versus cognitive emotional, two very different things, but that's at least what the body is sort of signaling is, okay, we're moving into our adult body. We're also seeing release of hormones that impact the brain, impact, mood, impact all kinds of things. And so, that's one of those time periods where your teenagers act very much like teenagers because there's a lot of change going on. And then some things really important about sleep. Sleep is critically important. Most of us probably don't get enough sleep, but it's even more critical the younger you are. And these are just some quick guidelines. 3 to 5 year olds typically will need about 10 to 13 hours, 6 to 12, 9 to 12 hours, 13 to 18-year-olds, about 8 to 10. And really that 8 to 10 number is probably good for most adults. But again, the challenge is, how likely it is that most of us get that consistent 8 to 10 hours of sleep. Probably not, but critically important for children because their brain, is developing at this time, and their bodies need rest to develop. That change, that's going on needs rest. And something to think about is, maybe think back to your own experience in high school. But when did your high school day start? Did it start kind of earlier in the morning? Some people even have the opportunity to come in earlier to high school. Let's say when you're a senior, you might have a 0 hour, for example. You get to start your day a little bit earlier. And thinking about this, is this a problem? Should the day start earlier? Should it start later? There's a lot of research that's looked into this, and especially looking at like adolescent sleep patterns, timing, sleepiness, transition, all those things like that. And there's a lot of research that points in the direction of, the earlier the school day starts, it's not always great for academic outcomes. The brain, kids need more sleep. The longer they have the time to sleep, the brain is operating on a much higher basis. So more sleep is usually good, and so a later start time can be beneficial. So wrapping things up, just something to think about from this lecture. What was something that was surprising to you? And then also, if you could give a piece of advice to teachers, what would you share based on this lecture? So that's going to wrap it up. We're done with week number 2 of our class. I'll see you on the other side for week 3. Take care. Bye.